How dare you, Kyle? How dare you? DarbyCast Wildcard Friday. Welcome back, doctors. Kyle was really just stepping out of line, weren't you, Kyle? Kyle made the absurd assertion that humongous institutions and government should go the way of the dodo bird. Many of them should just fail and not be bailed out. Kyle, that is dangerous, terrorist adjacent language. You are boiling my blood today, Kyle. Not okay. Not one bit. No, sir. But it's DarbyCast and it's Wildcard Friday. Kyle, I'm reluctant to even talk about the kind of evil ideas that you were suggesting. My gosh, are you just so inappropriate today? Kyle, I'm going to expose you and your evil ideas. Kyle said to me when he came in the studio, he said, wouldn't it be nice to live on a farm with a big house, with a wife who had pretty big jugs, and cell phones weren't really around, and there weren't adult men playing dress up, trying to sodomize kids? Kyle, check yourself. You are so disgusting. I don't even want to entertain such a space. Waking up, eating porridge, riding horseback places, Kyle? Then I couldn't have access to XM radio, potentially. I might be able to jerry-rig some kind of XM radio set up onto a horse. But that might be tricky, Kyle. Having a wife that could lean into her femininity? Haven't you heard, Kyle? A woman providing for her family is evil, but providing for her employer is empowering? Get with the times, you backwards fuck. Pardon my language. No, actually don't. I mean it, Kyle. Osama bin who, Kyle? You are now the terrorist that I am just keeping my eyes on. Chopping wood, Kyle, with an axe? That might build muscle, Kyle. And we all know about muscles. It's a slippery slope to being an intolerant right-winger. You remember what you also said the other day, Kyle? That if you lived on a farm, you wouldn't tolerate trespassers, be they citizens or be they foreign nationals, that you'd shoot them in the face with a shotgun and let the crows eat them? What has gotten into you, Kyle? My goodness. Kyle, if you can ever afford property and you don't have one of those signs that says science is science, love is love, Joe Biden is Joe Biden, I will just lose it. Kyle, if you ever have kids and the first thing you do on their 5th birthday isn't sit them down and show them a calendar of men in Speedos, you better believe I'm showing up with a lot of calendars of men in Speedos. Kyle, this is the way the world is moving. Okay. You got to be dialed in with it. All of this is totally sustainable. It's going to continue. Kyle, if on your kid's 10th birthday, they don't have a prescription for pharmaceutical grade meth, some kind of Adderall, then I'm going to report you to the NSA because your kids are a national security threat if they're not on meth. Kyle, okay. Get with the times, man. Gosh, I'm pissed. If your kids, Kyle, if any kid doesn't want to start hoarding cryptocurrency, Lescoin, tacked to the value of lesbians, aka infinite value, Kyle, then you're screwed. If your kids, Kyle, or anybody listening to this, let this just be a warning to any of you, because I will find you. If you aren't feeding your kids Captain Crunch, thus obliterating the roofs of their mouths and leaving a lot of oddly shaped wounds, then I am going to call the Navy, and they are going to park an aircraft carrier close to you, and they're going to fire missiles, and they're going to kill you and your kids. And that's the right thing to do. Kyle, you really need to get with the times, okay? So does every DarbyCast doctor. We are aligned with the way things are, going. If your kids know more about Jesus Christ than Janet Yellen and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Kyle, you can expect violence. Let me just paint the most evil picture I can imagine for anybody listening to this. You're married. You and your spouse share the same values. Infidelity is not part of your moral fabric. You have lots of kids. They know how to read and write, and they know the value of saying no. They have strong intuition, they have strong values, and they hate Satan. Didn't that just make your skin crawl? How evil that sounds? Really off-putting. Imagine how terrible the world would be if high schoolers didn't know how to use Photoshop to bully other kids into killing themselves. Imagine how awful that would be, Kyle. Imagine if we didn't have a helpful government that could tell everybody what to do all the time, what medicine to take, what things were okay to say out loud. People would really struggle without all that help, Kyle. I hope you know that. If people didn't throw parades for guys who skull fuck each other, Kyle, that's a society nobody wants to live in. You've been talking like this for a while now, Kyle, and it is so sickeningly right-wing and Nazi territory. All your ideas are Hitlerian. Women deserve to be on Percocet all the time, Kyle, scrambling their babies and vacuuming them out of their wombs. If they're allowed to entertain the idea that that's pretty weird, then we're screwed. If we don't have corrupt geriatrics at the helm, Kyle, who would lead the country? Riddle me that. You just don't have any of the answers. I have the answers, Kyle. I have been watching a lot of MSNBC lately, and I came to the sweeping conclusion that you're a dirtbag, Kyle. And I don't think I'm wrong about that. I'm in the in-group now, Kyle. I am now part of the anointed geniuses who know what's really going on. Any 5-year-old who doesn't know about the book by Robin DiAngelo, White Fragility, if they don't know about that, Kyle, are they really going to make it in this world? Probably not. Kyle, your little living on a farm fantasy, how would your kids play Hogwarts Academy and fly around on brooms? Yeah, come up with an answer to that. Why don't you? Good luck. Kyle, can you imagine how depressing it would be if your son didn't want to be a YouTube streamer? That would give all of us pause, Kyle. Kyle, we're going to be friends for life. So thankfully, I can ensure that you're always going to do the right thing. Right? Kyle, if you had a daughter that somehow didn't want to travel and get shit-faced all the time, are you even a parent? Kyle, let's continue on this. Imagine if your daughter didn't know political talking points and how to yell them super loud. What if she couldn't reach max volume on her voice? Did you ever even consider that? Gosh, you would be such an awful parent, Kyle. The whole owning your own land thing, Kyle, then how would you live in an 80 square foot apartment with 5,000 people as your neighbors who are all within a stone's throw and most of them don't speak your language or share your values. What a terrible life that sounds like, Kyle. Having a bunch of wide open space, walking out in nature, you could get a bug bite, Kyle, and you might never recover from that. I'm looking out for you. Did you know that? Because you've been rolling your eyes a lot during this coaching session. Kyle, imagine your kids being so disgusting and repulsive that they didn't have a self-flagellating stance towards American history. Imagine if they thought Europe was okay. I can't believe none of these thoughts have occurred to you, Kyle. Get with the times. If your kids were homeschooled, they'd probably be dumbasses, Kyle, and they would probably think that paying extra taxes couldn't solve the global temperature fluctuating occasionally. Do you really want to have kids that stupid, Kyle? What if your kids didn't have access to weed and pornography, Kyle? They would be such screwballs. You got to think for a second, okay? What if your kids weren't pro-government? What if they weren't pro-big tech, Kyle? What if they didn't realize how amazing censorship is? Do you ever think about that? That ever cross the horizon of your noggin? That foggy abyss that clearly can't process a damn thing these days, Kyle? What if they didn't? Kyle, let's go back to that daughter of yours, hypothetical daughter, right? Imagine if she couldn't listen to Slutwash, pop music, then she could never find herself. Never. She would never connect with herself and others. If she couldn't hear songs about vaginas, she's going to grow up and be so weird. So weird. Okay. You remember when you were telling me that guns were okay, Kyle? I don't have any facts to counter that, but I just know you're evil. Guns equal evil, Kyle. Spread the word. Self-defense is not a right. It's not okay. I'll tell you what's a human right, Kyle. Food, housing, butt plugs. Wake up. Kyle, imagine kids smiling too much. People would probably get the sense that they were happy and thus pretty bigoted. You don't want that. Imagine living in some twisted world, Kyle, where you couldn't just order scented candles online and have them delivered in a day and a half. Kyle, you are so anti-progress. I didn't even know any of these things about you, but you revealed your hand. And now I will shame you publicly. Consider this your cancellation, Kyle. Consider it done. Check that. Has it even begun yet? Because I can just keep dropping a world of pain on you. And you deserve it for having all these backwards ideas. Imagine living in a world where your kids couldn't get a degree in oppression studies. Imagine if their self-esteem was above 0. Is it dangerous kids, Kyle? Do you want to have dangerous kids? I'm just thankful that no woman would ever want a guy who went against the grain and against the system. Thank goodness. You're never going to get any chicks, Kyle, with your muscles and your brutish, unrefined attitudes. You know what women want, Kyle? They want guys who are skinny or super fat and aren't afraid to tell you about Chewbacca and the Millennium Falcon. Do you even know the art of seduction, Kyle? Gosh, you the conversations we've had in the recent past, Kyle. Not only has your ignorance been showing, but your bigotry, your social beliefs that are like, if cavemen were Nazis. Let me keep painting a picture of this evil world that you've been hinting at. Imagine if you didn't have Netflix and you couldn't watch media that made you hate everything about yourself. Kyle, I think I need to send you a couple Netflix shows that illustrate the importance of gay blacks saving the day and sturdy-jawed women taking charge. Maybe then you'll begin to understand the world worth living in. Kyle, what if your son couldn't take estrogen pills to grow misshaped, milky tits? He's going to be devastated. Kyle, imagine if your future wife didn't have access to unlimited opiates. There'd be no way for her to relax, ever. Kyle, imagine if your future wife didn't know what the Houdini was or a Cleveland steamer. Would you ever be intimately satisfied if that weren't the case? Probably not. Why don't you just play the tape forward, Kyle, and think about all this stupid crap that you've espoused to me in private, in confidence? Thank goodness I can reveal to people why you aren't okay. Kyle, imagine if your entire family's driving motivator wasn't money and prestige. Your neighbors wouldn't respect you at all. I'm just fleshing this out, Kyle, because you had some pretty silly ideas. Kyle, imagine if your wife couldn't eat a hot dog in one bite without chewing. She'd be the laughingstock of the neighborhood. Kyle, can you imagine working at some kind of company that wasn't excited about diversity hires? Kyle, imagine if your daughter didn't have half her head shaved and the other portion spiked up and dyed pink. Would people have any idea that she was interesting then? Probably not. Kyle, do you really think that living on a farm with limited to no data connection is going to be helpful when your wife and daughter come to you and say, we're thinking about starting an OnlyFans? What then, Kyle? What are you going to tell them? You want your kids to miss out on VR and play outside, dooming them to a life of knee scrapes and bug bites? You are sadistic, Kyle. You're twisted, okay? It's not the 1700s anymore, Kyle. Women order DoorDash. You're going to try to encourage your wife to explore her creative side through cooking, thus undoing everything that society's about? You know how much your kids would struggle, Kyle? Anybody's kids would struggle if they had to go through life without ChatGPT, which is, you guessed it, a human right. Living on a farm, Kyle, where's the ChatGPT? Where is it? Kyle, imagine how wicked your neighbors would be. They wouldn't respect Ukraine. I'm just painting a picture, Kyle, of the worst kind of hell that anybody could ever occupy. If your family and your neighbors didn't care about what was going on the other side of the world, as told by 5 or 6 multinational media companies, they weren't aligned, that's white supremacy, Kyle. Definition. I bet you your neighbors, these evil people, wouldn't be okay with your whole family being violated by Pakistani immigrants. Do you really want to live around people that screwy, Kyle? What if you could never interface with somebody from Somalia or Eritrea or Botswana, Sierra Leone, Kyle? Your life would be a disaster. Imagine never tasting food from Uruguay or Myanmar or Cambodia, Kyle. Imagine your whole neighborhood being deprived of Vietnamese pigeon tacos. What if your son couldn't work on an app that generated wacky cat names? He's going to be depressed. Guaranteed. What if your wife can't work for 12 hours a day at a corporation? Is she even a woman at that point? Kyle? You know how bigoted your kids' legs would be if they rode regular bikes instead of e-bikes? You're lucky to have me in your life, Kyle, to keep you honest and keep you aligned with the stuff that matters. How awful does it sound for a boy to keep his penis squarely on his body for his whole life? What if your neighbors, your kids, your wife never experienced the joy of being robbed at gunpoint and thus better understanding those who are victims of society and systemic injustice? Wake up, dude. I think that's what we're going to call this episode, is wake up. What if you had to adjust your own thermostat? What if you couldn't ask Alexa what the weather was going to be like? You'd just be flying blind. What if your kids didn't know how to twerk because they didn't have access to TikTok? What if they didn't know the latest dance moves? I am preventing catastrophic failure for you, Kyle, in the avenues in which you would have crashed and burned. Imagine if your kids didn't know that George Washington Carver invented peanut butter. Do you ever think about how stupid they'd be if they didn't know that? What if they didn't understand volcanoes? What if your kids didn't know the difference between igneous rocks and sedimentary? What if they didn't know the difference between a divergent and a convergent plate? They're screwed. They are toast. These are all the things that your kids would either get wrong or mess up on. What if your wife had a negative view of prostitution? Sex work is real work, Kyle. And it's empowering. Wake the fuck up. What if your family didn't know who Natalie Portman was? I almost threw up right there, Kyle. I can't even begin to entertain such a negative space. If your kids didn't know who the Avengers were, what it looked like to serve justice to aliens, those kids sound like dumbasses, right? Imagine if your kid didn't have a Spider-Man backpack. How would the rest of the kids know that he was okay? What if your kid never got to taste Lunchables? You may as well just not have kids at all. Let me ask you another one, Kyle. What if your kids asked questions better than they could memorize talking points, and you had to constantly help them understand things in a critical way? Sounds exhausting. That would take away from your time playing PlayStation 22. That's right. I'm looking all the way into the future, Kyle. Imagine having grandkids that didn't lecture you, Kyle, on why you were such a piece of garbage. That's old age that I don't want to reach. But you're just inviting all of this into your life, into your world. We cannot let these ideas spread. That's why I'm doing this episode, Kyle, so everybody knows the correct way to think. If anybody is dreaming about modifying anything that I've said here, I'm calling the feds. Kyle, you're lucky. You're lucky. But this is the last chance I'm giving you. Next time you show up saying something as bigoted and as backwards, racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, blackphobic, that's worse than regular racism, Kyle. That word hasn't quite hit the scene yet. But since I'm a hero, I'm making up new words. Your kids, Kyle, which thank goodness no woman will ever sleep with you. Imagine meeting a girl in real life, just out and about. You know, approaching women in real life is conversational rape, right, Kyle? Get with the times. What if your stupid little family cared more about your neighbors than they cared about the people of Tajikistan? What if they cared about those people more than they cared about what was going on in the Kremlin? What if they weren't up to date on Kremlin activities? It's an unprepared idiot kid, Kyle. Whew. Kyle, I'm going to treat you to an estrogen smoothie with sprinkled microplastics on the top so you can just kind of settle down. I'm going to give you an Ambien, maybe some Percocet, some weed, so you can just like get in the correct lane. And then you got to go jack off a couple times, 40 times in a row. Your toxic masculinity is showing, Kyle. If you don't J-O, Kyle, imagine if you didn't spend 2 hours in the bathroom with the bathtub running, researching housekeepers getting stuck in washing machines. Would your wife even respect you? Food for thought. I haven't had to come down on you hard like this in a while, Kyle, but I want to thank you for letting me correct you and bring you out of this terrible space. Get in line, Kyle. We can't have people thinking like you. All of these ideas you've been having, the seeds of fascism. And what do we do with fascism, Kyle? That's right. We complain about it. Even if you don't really know what it is, there are only two forms of government: democracy and fascism. That's it. Okay? Remember that, Kyle. Anything that's not technocratic authoritarianism, democracy, is fascism, and it's evil. That needs to be the big takeaway for you, Kyle. The hugest takeaway. If you're not running the play, you're fascist, and I will assume that you should be killed. And I'm going to tell people about it, Kyle. I'll tell the government. I will tell as many people as possible. And they're going to kill you. And that is how we save society. Okay, Kyle? So remember what I've told you, or else you're going to die. But I won't actually do it myself. I'll just tell somebody else and they'll do it, hopefully. What I'm trying to say in this episode, Kyle, educate yourself. That's it. Do better. You have to do better. We all have to do better. You're not giving it your best. Therefore, you are evil. That's going to do it for DarbyCast Wildcard Friday. I sure hope you aren't entertaining any of these wacky ideas like Kyle. Or we're coming for you. Me and the people who are on the right side of history.